is Chuck Edson again with Kiva's Corner, and again my imaginary friend Kiva Sugarman here behind me to keep me in line. Again, he's about my grandfather's age, or was about my grandfather's age when they lived. His motto, Kiva's, not my grandfather's, it was I ain't mad at nobody, and here at Kiva's Corner we try to live by that and hold conversations for consensus. This is another episode in what I'm trying to put together as a kind of introductory theory to what I'm trying to say. First of all, looking at our present situation as what is the problem, what is the cause, and what are the solutions. I've been thinking about this for a number of years, most of my life, I guess. The problem with human beings is us. We, as Pogo said in the 1970s, we have met the enemy and it is us. So I believe that what I've covered in moral foundations theory and in under emotions is kind of how our problems are manifest. This problem with humanity, we express them and we get into problems with about our moral foundations and how we react to things and what things mean to us. And a cause, I believe, is our leaders. They exploit these conflicts and differences that we have, and we try to work them to their advantage. And if our leaders aren't up to it, the political parties definitely promote it themselves. Third, the solution. This episode is talking about leaders. The next episode, I'll be talking about what I believe is the solution, and that is deliberative democracy. So now we are talking about a book by an author named Brian Klaas. The book is Corruptible, and Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. So this is I haven't read the book. I've listened to Dr. Klaas talk about his book several times in lectures and in interviews. And what is really great about his book, what his ideas are really good, and his analysis of things is really, I think, spot on. But as I said, there's a political pundit who's quite well known, Heather Cox Richardson, a conservative spokeswoman, and she says it better with what I could say about Klaas's book. She says that the book describes how ordinary people can keep leadership out of the hands of monsters. Pretty dramatic. I like that. Well, Klaas wrote his book after, as part of his doctoral thesis, and he interviewed, he estimates some 500 leaders around the world, and some good ones, but mostly bad ones, I think. And leaders, not only political leaders and national leaders, but other tyrants, including, military dictators and unethical CEOs and embezzlers and cheats and liars and cult leaders even, and we'll get to an example of that here. And the first example he uses is how different police agencies go about recruiting police. And he finds the worst case he could find anywhere was in Doraville, Georgia. They've since cleaned up their act and their stuff, but in his video and in his book, Klaas shows a death mask skull, which the Doraville police used as one of their recruitment posters. Anyway, and then he shows a clip from a video recruitment that they did, and it shows a military troop carrier running into a scene with tear gas canisters flying out of it, and the troop carrier stops, with a small cannon in front, and all these guys run out with SWAT written on their backs and black uniforms and assault rifles and, military garb. Well, so that's an example of how to get some really authoritarian police officers. And he contrasts that with another police recruitment film created in New Zealand. And this one's quite a bit different.
We want New Zealand to be the safest country in the world. But we can't do it without your help.
When you join the police, you'll be trained with skills to keep you and others safe. Receive a good starting salary.
Drop it!
After that example of recruiting bad police officers, class goes into another example that's much different on how to recruit the wrong people. And this one is a whole different take on a very famous experiment that was done in 1971 in Stanford. Many people at least have heard of it, called the Stanford Prison Experiment. And all the guards got special caps and mirrored sunglasses and stuff, and all the prisoners were given baggy pants and T-shirts with individual numbers on them. And they had all these little cells put up in somewhere basement someplace on the campus of Stanford, and they ran a prison. The guards escorted people around. They ate together, did all that stuff. And as Zimbardo expected, things went badly, but they went a whole lot worse than he expected.
Hands off the door.
There was the first evening a kind of rebellion that took place.
The prisoners rebelled. They barricaded themselves in their cells and said, we refuse to come out. They took off their numbers. They didn't want to be de-individuated. They started cursing the guards to their face. And the key turning point was the guards began to think of them as dangerous prisoners.
Like in 2005, I think it was, a small university in Kentucky decided they were going to take another look at how Zimbardo recruited these students. And so they did the same kind of thing, but they went to two different universities somewhere in Kentucky. And in one university, they ran an ad just like the one at Stanford, male college students needed for a study of prison life, And at the other college, it was students needed for psychological experiment, same pay and everything. Nobody got uniforms, nobody went into cells, nobody was assigned as a guard or a prisoner, but instead they herded them all into one big room and made them take a bunch of psychological tests. And these were not your average tests of interest or personality. These were to study some pretty dark personality traits called narcissism, Machiavellianism, authoritarianism, and psychopathy. Now, I'm going to talk some more about what those things are, but I hope you believe me, they're traits that we all have to some degree, but hopefully not to the degree that tyrants have, most of us anyway. But so what they found with these studies was, these surveys or tests that the people took, is that the type of person that responded to the psychological experiment were a lot different than the people who responded to the study for the prison life experiment. And the ones that volunteered for the prison life experiment were all those bad things I mentioned: narcissistic, Machiavellian, authoritarian, and psychopathic, all to a much greater degree than the group for the other experiment. Recruitment, though, he refers to another experiment called the roll the dice experiment, which shows that it's not just the recruitment, and it's also culture. Different cultures come up with something different. Now, so this roll the dice experiment that somebody did is pretty interesting too, and that is that he got some researchers got two groups of people, some of them in Denmark, And then they went to India and got a bunch of other people to take part in this experiment. So in both cases, they would give a person a dice, or a die, I guess, one of those six-sided things. And they would say, okay, here's a table, a chair, here's your dice, and you're in this room, and we're not going to watch you. Roll that dice 42 times and count how many times you roll a 6. Well, so they would all come out and report how many times they rolled a 6. Well, they didn't call anybody a liar or honest or anything, but they used statistics to pretty surely identify people who were lying about it. Maybe, I don't know if they got more money for getting more, I don't know if there was any incentive or just, but quite a few of these people, turned out a lot of people were liars about how many 6s they got. And they didn't compare India and Denmark about how many were liars or how many were honest, but they did something else. They asked the people, all the people, and all the subjects in Denmark and all those in India, what kind of work is it you want to get when you're out of college? And this is what happened. It turned out that the liars in India wanted government jobs, and the honest people in Denmark wanted government jobs. And the Denmark liars wanted private sector jobs. Well, and supposedly everybody knows that government bureaucracy in Denmark is very honest and no corruption involved. I mean, I guess this is true. I don't question it, but that appears to be what is pretty accurate, at least in terms of some have data. But with that given, what they concluded was, and to the extent that this is all true about the cultural differences, that the kinds of cultures, if having a government job in India can make you more money, it's dishonest people who are going to get those jobs. Okay, so then they're moving on. That pretty much covers how recruitment and different cultures get us worse leaders. And we could make some judgments about our culture that I won't go into here, but with that, we do have leaders at higher levels that can make a lot of money, let's put it that way. Now on to the second question. Does power make people worse? And the answer again is yes. And again, as I told you, the example he uses comes from Oregon. Now, during the 1980s, there was a huge cult out in rural north central Oregon.
80s. Thousands of people from around the world came to a remote stretch of land and built a thriving city. Seriously, they had a mall, newspaper, they even built a dam. All this was created to fulfill a vision from an Indian spiritual leader who dreamed that this dot on the Oregon map could become a utopia. His name was Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. As tensions grew, Sheila and other leaders hatched a plot to gain even more influence in local politics by electing Rajneeshis to the Wasco County government. The first move was to increase the vote for their candidates. They bussed in around 4,000 homeless people from across the country to Rajneeshpuram. They encouraged them to vote in local elections and gave them beer laced with a powerful tranquilizer.
You've got some good beer here.
The second move was to suppress the local vote. In a secret laboratory, Sheila oversaw the creation of a batch of salmonella. They proceeded to pour it in salad bars at restaurants in the Dalles, as well as in glasses of water given to local officials. Over 750 people got sick. It was one of the largest bioterrorist attacks ever committed on U.S. soil.
Well, nobody died, but a lot of people got sick, and Sheila Silverman spent 7 years in prison in Oregon before she got paroled to Switzerland. Brian Klaas interviewed this woman back in Switzerland, and she's again a modest, responsible citizen, quite a bit older, And she runs a home for an elderly there for the government in Switzerland and does a good job. It was the power that corrupted her. So, yeah, as we know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The third question, why do we let bad leaders lead us? And this one we can also get through pretty quickly. I've talked about it before, and many people have talked about it. And it's evolutionary mismatch. You know, we were brought up through millions of years relying on a strong, decisive male leader to keep us all in line, use some fairness and justice, but have enough power and support with his friends to keep everybody in order. And especially when tribes started competing, it even became more important to have a more powerful leader. So that's where this comes from, according to evolutionary theory. And here I want to quote another fellow that I really admire. He died in 1921 at the age of 94 or something. Was a famous evolutionary psychologist named Edward Wilson. And he's famous for this quote: "The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, and is now approaching a point of crisis overall." Nope, that may be the truth of what's going on today. So how do we keep bad leaders out of power? And this is where Brian Klass starts getting into some of his better ideas. But first of all, he says, well, actually, there are good ways to identify bad leaders. And I'm going to, without naming anybody, make some allusions to a person who was a major leader in the United States until recently. And you know, a lot of people were warning us that this guy was not ethical. He wouldn't pay his bills. He went bankrupt all the time. He had people build hotels for him, never paid for him, never paid him back. He had former wives and all kinds of other associates who would say, God, you can't believe anything he says. He'll make you sign a non-disclosure agreement, and then he'll really work you over, and you won't be able to say anything about it. Brian Klass talks about some other ideas that are a little bit far-fetched, but interesting, and I'll mention them. For example, he says, well, we could get, really psychopathic people and put them on jobs that are suited to their nature. I mean, psychopaths really handle stress well. They don't have any regard for danger, so let's turn them into bomb diffusers, or let's turn them into, special forces and be on SEAL Team 6. And, I think actually our military is on to this. My dad told me a story about a fellow he knew that was recruited into the Rangers in World War II that told the recruiters that for the Rangers that if they gave him a knife and told him to kill his mother, that he'd do it. Didn't like her much anyway. My dad didn't apply for that, but this guy he knew did. And there's all kinds of anti-heroes or popular fictional anti-heroes or something that, like James Bond, or one of my personal favorites, a fellow named Dexter, who, he killed people who deserved to be killed, except for a couple of times he made mistakes. We're going to come back and review those concepts of narcissistic, Machiavellian, authoritarian, and psychopathic. Well, as I mentioned, Klass uses these terms in his lectures, but he doesn't define them there. He may do it in the book, but he didn't in anything that I watched or heard him say. One of the points is, I guess, kind of an obvious one, is that we don't want to recruit people into positions of power who want power, because most of the time, if you're going to handle power responsibly, it's not fun. It's a heavy responsibility. you got to make very tough decisions about things that harm some people and benefit some other people, and it's not fun to do that, but it's necessary, I guess. So we want people who aren't eager to get positions of power, but will take it if they have to, I guess. So I think fundamentally, we got to find better ways to recruit in a different way, more like capture and force them into the right people into power or something. So Klaus, we'll get to this a little later too, but he makes a point of how these bad traits, the narcissism and the Machiavellianism and so forth, work together in sequence to where the wrong people not only seek power, they win elections based on something else, and they can hold power because of other characteristics. And it takes an unlikely combination of all these things to get the worst kind of leaders. So here we're going to quickly go through the four character traits that are among the what's bad here. First of all is narcissistic. And here I'm just going to show these slides for a bit here, and just hit on the high points, I guess. Narcissistic. Well, the narcissistic personality is the only one that's defined officially in the major textbook of psychological disorders, which is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders. And it lists quite a number of personality disorders. One of those is narcissism. These other three characteristics we're going to talk about don't get that official designation or recognition. But anyway, a narcissist is grandiose, has fantasies of power and success. They believe they're special people. They expect excessive admiration. They have a strong sense of entitlement. This is kind of their signature characteristic. They exploit other people to take advantage for their own gains. They lack empathy and really can't identify with people's needs. They're envious of anybody that they think may be in a better position than them, than they are, and they're arrogant and dismissive of others. So so let's say none of us are like that. So now are any of us Machiavellian? Well, turns out I am. Machiavellian people are manipulative and indifferent to morality, lack empathy, and have a strategic interest in self-interest. Well, God, I hope I'm not that bad, but Machiavelli was a fellow named Niccolo Machiavelli who wrote the book The Prince back in 1512. And he worked for a very powerful family, Medici family in Italy back then, and the Medici family got kicked out of power, and Machiavelli thought he'd be able to gain favor with the new family, and he didn't, and he became very embittered by that and wrote the book The Prince, and some people think he was very serious about that, others think he was tongue-in-cheek, but anyway, I took the Mach 4 test on anybody can take it online, and I really think a lot of people will be surprised like I am that I believe we're living in cynical times. Maybe that we just expect deceitfulness around us with what we're being sold and told, and it just becomes part of our nature, I guess, and sarcastic and almost contemptuous kind of humor. To be honest, George Carlin was probably the best at that, and I love George. So if you like that kind of humor, like I do, there's some part of you is Machiavellian. And I try not to be, but I got to admit I'm a licensed cynic, and I actually have a lot of faith in individual people. I just have very little faith in when more than two people or more to get together for some purpose. I don't trust it. Anyway, so I'm working alone. Sorry, back to be serious here. Now on to psychopathic. Now, this is one that I'm familiar with, not personally, well, in the sense that I worked with criminals all my life, or well, my professional life. And psychopathic people are truly dangerous. However, I have to say most criminals are not psychopaths. Most of them are dangerous to themselves, and not so much for dangerous to other people, except for, being collateral damage for the damage to do to themselves. But some psychopathic people are really great politicians and really great CEOs and really successful salespeople, and especially those who promote hate on social media or sell video games or kill people and then pay to get new weapons. I mean, those are psychopathic people, in my opinion. I'm kind of somewhat of an expert in psychopathy, not only because of my work, but I went to some training that the guru of psychopathy put on up in Vancouver, Washington, and I took his training back in the mid-90s on the psychopathy checklist. And quickly I'll go through what those criteria are. First of all, there are 20 criteria for psychopathy, and you got to, I don't know what the cutoff score is, but you got to score pretty high on something like 5 of each one of them to be considered a psychopath. But Hare has broken it down into psychopathy as in terms of personality traits, and then he's also another 10 that he's broken down into behaviors. So the personality traits or values, I'll run through these quickly like I did the others. Glibness or superficial charm, another grandiose sense of self-worth, need for stimulation, prone to boredom, pathological lying when it'd be better to tell the truth, conning and manipulative, lack guilt or remorse, shallow affect, really don't show any empathy or any emotional response to much of anything, are known to be parasitic, freeloaders. I knew in my criminal work, my criminal career, a lot of freeloaders, people who were sleeping on couches of friends and families, and poor self-control. Now, some of these are kind of hard to distinguish personality trait from behavior, but the second 10 here get into what he meant by behavioral traits of psychopaths. One, promiscuous sexual behavior, early behavioral problems, especially important if you have a criminal who began young, began his criminal career young. You've got a worse character on your hands. Lack of realistic long-term goals. Again, this seems to be more like a value than a behavior, but anyway, they're impulsive and reckless. They're irresponsible. Some of these things kind of overlap, failure to accept responsibility, always denying, it wasn't me, it was Jude's fault, or Logan here, he did it wrong. Many short-term marital and sexual relationships, juvenile delinquency, basically, problems in your youth. This one, I'm familiar with revocation of conditional release. If their person's on probation or parole, they're going to mess it up. If they are to appear in court, they often miss appearing in court. And if they're really psychopathic, they go out of their way to escape from custody. And there are some notorious cases like that. And the last item here, too, is one that's really important working with criminals, and that is criminal versatility. Most criminals are kind of specialists. They write bad checks. They commit burglaries. They commit robberies. They embezzle. They do assaults. Criminally versatile people, psychopaths, they do any of those. They follow up any. They follow up any opportunity. So let's move on here with what class suggests we could do to deal with corruptible leaders. And first of all, identify them in the first place. And people that, talk to the people and listen to the people who know the person well. People who worked for them or worked with them. Did he pay his bills? Did he honor his contract? Did he go bankrupt, or he or she go bankrupt and leave a lot of service providers left hanging and going bankrupt themselves? Were they married to them? Did they require them to sign a non-disclosure agreement so they could get away with what they wanted? So, as I mentioned, also we could put them on put them on jobs that require exceptional indifference to anxiety, like bomb diffusers or CIA agents or James Bond, for example. Then there's another approach that class talks about, and this one gets into, I think, something a little more practical. And you can think of it as a sting operation, or maybe almost like entrapment. But he uses some examples from the New York Police Department, and I'm not sure how often they did this or when they did it, or if they still did it. But they had a protocol, they had a procedure to catch crooked cops, and they called this process integrity tests. And what they would do is they would go set up an apartment. They'd get an apartment, set it up like, a drug dealer was living there. They'd have a table with, bags of cocaine or whatever and piles of money and stuff laying around and some nice firearms and stuff. And then they'd put mics and cameras in this room where nobody would see them. And then the sergeant would call the officer, maybe it was a police officer at random or somebody they suspected, and they'd say, "Hey, Fred, go to this apartment so-and-so and hold the scene. We think it's a crime scene, and we can't get anybody there for the next hour or so, but if you'd go there and hold it, we'd appreciate it." Well, so then they'd let the guy go and hold it, and then they'd show up in an hour and see what was still there. If the cash and some of the drugs and the best firearms were gone, they knew they had a corrupt cop. And so later on, some interesting things happened to this. When officers heard about this going on, people cleaned up their act. That's one thing. And the reason they knew this is that they later, after this integrity project was done and it became known publicly, they asked the police officers, how many of you think you were part of a sting operation? Well, maybe 10 officers were, but 50 officers thought they had been they'd been part of a sting operation. So we know those other 40 or 50, whatever, they were behaving themselves. And this New York police did the same kind of thing, except for looking for officers who used excessive force, and that is they'd pay some citizen to put on hide a mic on themselves somewhere and go up and try to aggravate an officer. And if the officer responded with, being unkind or insulting or worse, there would be a record of it. So, and again, that kind of knowledge that kind of thing could work within our Congress, perhaps. Maybe some sting operations could be set up. But class doesn't quite go that far with how to deal with Congress. But he does talk about how to set up a parallel or shadow Congress. And this idea gets right into what a deliberative democracy practice in a way. And that is a shadow or a parallel Congress would be, for example, there are 435 members in our Congress. Well, suppose Congress or the State Department or somebody put aside a few $1 million and said, okay, we're going to randomly select 435 citizens from around the country, according to the state's population and so forth. We're going to pay them to learn what they need to learn about some issues, and they're going to get together and work on these issues and vote on same issues Congress is, and we'll see how they come out, and we'll see how they compare to what the real Congress votes on. And we know these citizens aren't getting any lobbyists, they're not getting any payoffs, they're not getting any special favors from anybody. I don't know how we'd make it work with the Supreme Court, but it would be a parallel Congress, and the press could maybe compare how the citizen Congress decided versus how the political Congress voted, and ask why they didn't do the same thing the citizens did. So class then he mentions some other ideas that, again, that fit right into deliberative democracy, which is, by the way, our next topic here. But sortition, that was a Greek practice back in ancient Athens 2,500 years ago. It wasn't exactly a true democracy because it was only white guys and men and those with property, but they all came together and they all got in the bleachers or something. By random, they'd pull out a letter of the row, and the members of the public that were in that row, they were going to be members of Senate. Then they'd pull out 2 or 3 other letters, and those people would be member of the Senate too. So, yeah, these kinds of practices could be done with our government. I think that would help keep things in check. I think it's time. I've mentioned earlier, I think at the beginning here, that I'm really disgusted with the political parties with the leaders that the political parties give us. They're just the strongest man representative of whatever it is that that side represents for the most part. Our electoral system is kind of a joke. It was probably made a lot of sense 250 years ago when there was no electricity and no other way to count things, and to bring everybody together up to Washington, D.C. to tell us how many people voted in each of the 13 states. But I want to end this here and try to tie together something I mentioned before in the previous episode. And that last episode, I mentioned an important political insight where Haight's group had seen that liberals and conservatives respond in the first fifth of a second when shown some stimulus, like a picture of somebody being beaten or a picture of somebody loving their child and somebody starving to death. That liberals and everybody alike, in that first fifth of a second, there's no empathy shown for that starving child and no particularly soft feelings for the mother and child. But within the half a second, it does change, except for psychopaths. All right, we are approaching the end of this recording, and we'll be moving on very soon to the second in this series. The second episode is going to be short and is going to cover some thoughts I've added to class's discussion about corruptible leaders. We've looking here at the combination of the narcissistic, Machiavellian, and the psychopathy traits to come up with a dictator. I've added another negative or dark side of humanity called authoritarianism that was also researched after World War II, and we will be covering that in the next episode, and stuff about how fascism has come into our times again, I believe, with authoritarian dictators often associated with militant power or even with divinity. So thank you, and tune in then.